The lawyer for the family of Nolan Wells reveals new evidence in their investigation into how he died. Wells was only 18 years old when he disappeared during a 4th of July boating trip with friends.
7 questions. That is what the family's own independent pathologist listed as unresolved after his examination of Nolan Wells' body. Not vague uncertainty. 7 specific, named, scientific questions, the exact things that still separate this case from an answer. Then this week, a fabricated toxicology report began circulating online, claiming to offer results nobody has actually seen. And a furor erupted over what the fake report said. But the real furor, the one that actually matters, is what it revealed about how many of Dr. Roger Mitchell's 7 original questions remain completely unanswered, and 6 weeks after he first asked them super. Hit that bell. Start with what triggered this week's controversy. A toxicology report, formatted to appear official, began circulating across social media in the final days of July and claiming to present Nolan Wells' actual results. Mississippi Department of Public Safety Commissioner Sean Tyndall confirmed publicly on August 1st that the document was fraudulent, and the purported toxicology report from Nolan Wells circulating through social media on various outlets is fraudulent, he wrote, adding that fraudsters, AI, and social media are a recipe for disaster. Russell Latino, the attorney representing Nolan's friend Bart Edmiston Jr., issued his own parallel warning days later. But Latino's statement revealed something considerably more specific and more disturbing than a generic fake document. According to TMZ, Latino directly accused an OnlyFans model of falsely claiming that Bart Edmiston Jr. helped cause and cover up Nolan Wells' death, and separately alleged that she had shared the family's personal information online, and, not simply repeating unverified rumors, a specific claim that a named young man actively participated in causing Nolan's death and then took further action to cover it up. Attributed to a specific online figure with an established platform and audience, whose stated occupation gives her content built-in reach across multiple social media ecosystems simultaneously. And Latino's office responded by sending her a formal cease and desist letter. That detail changes the shape of this entire controversy. This was not simply an anonymous, untraceable fabrication drifting through algorithm-driven feeds, and it involved a specific identifiable individual making a specific, serious accusation that a named young man helped cause and then cover up a death, combined with the separate act of exposing a grieving family's private information to the public. And sharing a grieving family's personal information online is not simply reckless. It is the kind of conduct that can produce real-world consequences. Unwanted contact, harassment, or worse, and directed at people who are already navigating the worst period of their lives. Based entirely on a claim that Latino's cease and desist letter asserts was false to begin with. That combination, a fabricated murder cover-up accusation, and paired with exposed personal information, and both traced to a specific content creator with an incentive to generate engagement, represents a particularly aggressive form of the misinformation this case has attracted since Nolan's death first became national news. That is the furor. And not simply a fake document exists, which is the version of this story most outlets have reported. A specific person made a specific accusation of causing and covering up a death and attached her claim to a fabricated document designed to look like scientific proof, and combined that with doxing a grieving family. Actions serious enough that an attorney determined a formal legal warning was necessary. Not just a public correction, Latino's statement made his position explicit. Someone's death should not be your entertainment. Touch grass today. That frustration reflects something beyond simple misinformation fatigue, and it reflects watching a real accusation, helping cause and cover up a death, get manufactured and attached to a real family's real tragedy, by someone with no evident connection to any of it beyond an online platform and an audience. And now the questions that actually matter, the ones this fabricated distraction has in its own way made even more urgent to answer honestly. Dr. Roger Mitchell, the forensic pathologist who conducted the independent autopsy the family commissioned, funded by civil rights activist Colin Kaepernick, completed his examination in July. His findings were limited, and he was explicit about why. And no major fractures, no severe traumatic injuries clearly explaining Wells's death, but also, critically, no ability to rule out foul play. and a specific area of red discoloration on the back of Nolan's head that Mitchell described as inconclusive and requiring further investigation. And Mitchell attributed much of his examination's limitations to decomposition, which had progressed enough by the time he received Nolan's body to prevent definitive conclusions about bruising, abrasions, or other injuries that might have been visible earlier. A body examined immediately after death offers a forensic pathologist information that simply does not exist a week or two later, regardless of how skilled or thorough the examination. And Mitchell was working against biology itself, not merely against limited access, a constraint no amount of expertise could fully overcome, and one that shaped every conclusion or absence of conclusion in his final report. From that examination, Mitchell listed 7 specific outstanding questions, the precise named gaps between what his independent autopsy could determine and what remains genuinely unknown about Nolan Wells' death. Among them, what actually led Wells to enter the water in the first place. That question alone carries enormous weight. An accidental entry, a voluntary entry, an entry preceded by some incapacitating event, or an entry that was not voluntary at all. Each possibility points toward an entirely different explanation for everything that followed. And Mitchell's examination could not determine which of those scenarios actually occurred, and whether there was water present in his airway, the single most direct forensic indicator of whether drowning occurred while he was alive, or whether he entered the water after some other cause of death had already occurred. And that distinction is not academic. Water in the airway typically indicates active breathing at the moment of submersion, meaning Nolan was alive when he entered the water. Its absence would suggest something else caused his death first, and with the water entering afterward, a finding that would fundamentally reshape the entire investigation's direction, whether he had sustained a brain bleed, a finding that, if present, could point toward blunt trauma rather than simple drowning, and a brain bleed, depending on its specific characteristics, can result from a fall, a blow, or other trauma entirely separate from drowning, and its presence or absence would meaningfully narrow the range of plausible explanations for what actually happened to Nolan that afternoon. Those 7 questions, taken together, represent the actual honest state of forensic knowledge in this case, not the fabricated toxicology numbers a stranger invented and shared online. 7 specific scientifically framed uncertainties, articulated by a credentialed forensic pathologist, that 6 weeks of investigation, state and independent combined, has still not resolved. And this is where the fake report controversy and the real forensic uncertainty intersect in a way that deserves direct attention. A fabricated document claiming precise toxicology results offers something Mitchell's honest, 7-question uncertainty cannot: false closure. It gives an audience hungry for resolution the illusion of an answer. Specific numbers, specific substances, the appearance of scientific finality. Precisely because Mitchell's genuine, careful, and methodical uncertainty cannot compete with a confident lie for public attention. That is not a minor observation about how misinformation spreads generally. It is a specific description of what happened this week in this case. Real, credentialed forensic uncertainty, honestly reported and openly acknowledged, was overtaken in public attention by a fabrication that offered the false comfort of a definitive answer. Uncertainty is harder to sell than certainty, even when the certainty is fake and the uncertainty is the actual truth. This pattern is not unique to forensic evidence. Any genuinely rigorous scientific or investigative process produces exactly this kind of frustrating, honest incompleteness, a list of what remains unknown, rather than a satisfying, complete narrative. Human attention, particularly online attention shaped by algorithms rewarding engagement over accuracy, gravitates toward the confident narrative every time, regardless of whether that confidence is earned. A pathologist willing to say, "I don't know, and here are the 7 specific reasons why," is offering something more valuable and considerably harder to package into a viral post than someone willing to simply invent numbers and present them as fact. That asymmetry between the genuine difficulty of honest scientific uncertainty and the easy, shareable confidence of fabrication is not a flaw specific to Mitchell's work or to this case. It is a structural feature of how information now moves through a public conversation shaped more by engagement metrics than by epistemic humility, And this week's fake toxicology report is simply the latest, most direct illustration of exactly how that dynamic plays out when it collides with a real family's real grief. Ben Crump, representing Nolan's family, and has continued pressing for a specific procedural outcome connected directly to Mitchell's 7 questions. And Crump has said he hopes the district attorney will present Dr. Mitchell directly before the grand jury reviewing this case, not simply submit his written report, but have Mitchell testify in person, answering questions, and walking jurors through exactly what his examination could and could not determine. We would hope that the district attorney would present Dr. Mitchell before the grand jury as well, Crump said. We want all relevant information to be heard by the grand jury. That request reflects a specific concern that a written report, however detailed, cannot fully convey the nuance of scientific uncertainty the way direct testimony can. The difference between a juror reading cause of death undetermined on a page and hearing a forensic pathologist explain in his own words and exactly which of his 7 questions remain open and why. And Crump has also directly cautioned against premature conclusions while those questions remain unresolved, a caution that applies with equal force to anyone tempted to treat a fabricated toxicology report as more informative than it actually is, and simply because it offers the comfort of specificity that the honest 7-question uncertainty does not. Kristen Wells Wansley, Nolan's mother, has described her own experience of this investigation's pace in terms that add painful and personal weight to the abstract question of why Mitchell's 7 questions remain unanswered. She said it is heartbreaking and it's concerning not to have heard more directly from local authorities. And the last time she personally spoke with the sheriff's office, she said, was a day or two after Nolan's body was found on July 6th. Weeks of silence for a mother whose son's death remains officially undetermined is not simply a procedural inconvenience. It is a specific, sustained absence of communication from the institution most directly responsible for eventually explaining what happened to her child. An absence that has run parallel to, and arguably fueled, the exact kind of information vacuum that fabricated documents and false accusations have rushed to fill. And she explained why she and her husband have felt compelled to pursue their own parallel investigative efforts. The independent autopsy, the public pressure, the ongoing demand for transparency, describing it directly. And local authorities told them they believed Nolan had drowned and did not suspect foul play. In her words, not even an hour after his body was recovered. And that specific timeline, a conclusion reportedly reached within an hour of recovery, sits in direct tension with Mitchell's 7 carefully framed, still unresolved questions, developed only after weeks of independent forensic examination. An initial assessment reached within an hour. 7 genuine scientific uncertainties identified only after a full independent autopsy, and conducted by a credentialed forensic pathologist with considerably more time and specialized training than whatever produced that first-hour impression. The gap between those 2 timelines, an hour versus weeks, an impression versus 7 documented questions, is precisely the kind of gap that makes a family describe their own investigation's pace as heartbreaking. That gap is also, in a very real sense, and what created the opening this week's fabricated toxicology report and false accusation both exploited. If an initial assessment forms within an hour and the more careful and more thorough examination that eventually raises 7 genuine questions takes weeks to complete and remains sealed even longer, the public is left for an extended period and with nothing official to hold on to, exactly the kind of vacuum a confident fabrication is built to fill. The official state autopsy results, the ones the fake toxicology report attempted to imitate, remain sealed. And officials confirmed on July 30th that the Mississippi State Medical Examiner had completed the official autopsy, performed July 7th, with the report submitted to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Those results have not been publicly released. Nolan's own family has not seen them. District Attorney Angel Myers McIlrath has explained this sealing as standard county procedure. Every death that is not from natural causes or a non-criminal accident is presented to a grand jury before details become public, and a practice, she says, predates this case entirely and applies consistently regardless of national attention. Every death in the county, except those of natural causes and non-criminal car wrecks, is presented to your grand jury. And McIlrath said in a recorded public statement that procedural consistency does not resolve Mitchell's 7 questions. And it simply confirms that the process capable of eventually resolving them, combining the sealed state findings with Mitchell's independent examination presented together before a grand jury, has not yet run its course, and Wells was the only black member of the friend group present that day. A detail that has shaped much of the national attention this case has received, and his family has said Mississippi's documented history of racial injustice has deepened their concerns about how this investigation has been conducted. A concern civil rights leaders including Crump and Reverend Al Sharpton have echoed publicly, and calling repeatedly for a fully transparent process. Mississippi's history with cases involving the deaths of black residents under unclear circumstances is extensively documented, a history that shapes, for many families in similar situations, the baseline level of trust extended to initial law enforcement assessments, particularly assessments reached as quickly as the one Christine Wells Wansley described. None of that history, on its own, and establishes what actually happened to Nolan Wells. It does explain why a family already navigating that historical weight would experience an hour-long initial assessment, followed by weeks of sealed silence, and as something considerably more troubling than a family without that same background might experience the identical timeline. Understanding this history helps explain why a fabricated toxicology report and a specific accusation against one of the friends spread by an unrelated online figure generated the level of furor they did this week. In a case already carrying this much historical weight, this much documented distrust between the family and local authorities, and this much unresolved scientific uncertainty, a fabricated document does not simply mislead the public about one detail, and it exploits an environment where genuine transparency has already been in short supply. Offering false specificity into a vacuum the family itself has repeatedly described as heartbreaking to live inside. And the reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction has grown to $125,000, with contributions from Tyler Perry, Colin Kaepernick, and Al Sharpton, among others. And that figure reflects sustained public and financial commitment to resolving this case, a commitment that exists entirely separate from, and arguably in direct tension with, the ecosystem of fabrication and false accusation that produced this week's specific furor 6 weeks in, and the family continues pressing for answers, while investigators await the results of official toxicology testing and the eventual grand jury review that will finally bring the sealed state findings and Mitchell's independent examination together in one place. And Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He went to Horn Island on July 4th and did not come home. His independent pathologist identified 7 specific questions his examination could not answer. A fabricated toxicology report and a specific false accusation against one of his friends briefly offered the public something Mitchell's honest science could not: the illusion of certainty. 6 weeks later, the real questions: what led him into the water, and whether water reached his airway before or after some other cause, whether a brain bleed occurred, remain exactly what they were when Mitchell first listed them. Unanswered, the furor this week did not add a single new fact to that list, and it did not move any of Mitchell's 7 questions closer to resolution. What it did was reveal with unusual clarity exactly how much appetite exists for a false answer when a real one has not yet arrived, and exactly how far someone will go, attaching a specific person's name to a specific fabricated crime, to satisfy that appetite rather than wait for the actual sealed truth to finally emerge. If you have any real information about what happened to Nolan Wells on Horn Island, and contact investigators directly, tips.fbi.gov or 1-800-CALL-FBI. The combined reward is now $125,000. If you encounter documents or accusations claiming to reveal Nolan's toxicology results or assign specific blame for his death, and verify them through law enforcement before sharing them further, Skudaspor, hit that bell. 7 real questions, 1 fake answer. The furor was never really about the fabricated document, and it was about how much easier a confident lie travels than 7 honest, unresolved questions, and how long a family can be expected to wait for someone to finally answer the real ones. somewhere in a sealed state file and in a completed autopsy report nobody outside a small circle of officials has read. At least some of Mitchell's 7 questions may already have answers. Whether those answers reach Nolan's family and the public before the next fabrication fills that silence remains the only question this week's Furor actually left open.